of the Lord into the house of the God.
All right, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. It's been a week. So, the parsha, we start Vayikra, Leviticus today. And actually, that's not the name of this book. Did you know that?
No.
Leviticus is from the Latin. So Vayikra, it's really the word Vayikra, as you'll see. The meaning of that is he called. So there's a little bit of a unusual setup there. So we'll start with Vayikra is pretty much all about the offerings, the sacrifices. Burnt offerings then were a way to connect with Yah and to each other. There have not been sacrifices in Israel for over 2,000 years. Just imagine if Moshe, who handed down the Torah, had that wonderful experience and relationship with Yahweh on the mountain. If he took a time machine to our present day, what would he see? A synagogue, people sitting and praying, Torah readings. He would probably be unable to relate to much of it being Jewish. He would probably be unable to figure out or understand what are these people doing. Just as we can't relate much to the sacrificial system being described in Vayikra or Leviticus, why then should we read the Torah if it's not part of our real world experience today? Why then should we read the Torah if it doesn't fit into what really is, happening? And that we can truly relate to it and apply it to our lives. When I read it, when most people read Vayikra, immediately it really doesn't mean a whole lot to them, does it? Okay? Is it possible that the concepts and larger meanings to the foundational principles of who Yahweh is what Yah is trying to convey to us? If a sin back then was committed, even an unintentional sin, an offering was required. Okay? In the form of goats, sheep, doves, pigeons. If you couldn't afford that, you brought a grain or a meal offering. Okay? So where is the divide? Where do we find our way here? As Jews, we have substituted doing mitzvahs, giving gifts, doing good deeds. Regardless of the extent or degree to which you can give or do a good deed, Yahweh is looking for the motive and intent of your heart. Does giving gifts and doing good deeds satisfy Yah's requirements? His requirements to deal with our rebellion, our disobedience, our wrongdoing, our sin? What does it say in the Torah? What is the connection from the sacrificial order back then to the way we receive forgiveness today? It says in Leviticus 17:11, "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for yourselves. For it is the blood that makes atonement because of the life." And we'll get into this further on as we go, but the life is in the blood. Of every living being, the life is in the blood. And a question to ponder, where does that life come from? What is that life? Scientists don't know what gives you life as a result of the makeup of your blood. They just can't really define it. Well, as we go through this, I have some thoughts on where the life comes from. Yeah, you could say Yahweh or God, but I think it's really simple the way Yahweh has given us life and why the life is in the blood. Sacrifices at that time were made 3 times a day. The morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And today, as Jews, customarily we pray 3 times a day. Back then, prayer was not as common as it is today. Everything revolved around the sacrifices. Okay. The Hebrew word for sacrifice is Corbin, from the root karov. And the root karov means to come close. When you bring forth a Corbin, you bring your very best. And when you come close to who? To what? As we will read on in the parsha, we're going to see the intimacy that is taking place between the person who's dealing with their sin or rebellion or disobedience and the Kohen, the kings and the priests, and Yahweh. And just think where we've come to. Just start at Genesis, in the beginning. By the way, in the beginning, God created is a very priestly phrase. But we've come all the way to this point where Yahweh has come down, is dwelling with his people, and is making provision for something he did back in Genesis, in Bereshit. Okay? Who made the first sacrifice? When was the very first sacrifice made? Anybody have an idea? And who made it? Actually, Yahweh did it. And how do we know that? Let's just think. We talked about how to interpret Scripture. From the literal, cultural, and as it was at that time, to the allegorical, metaphorical, the drash, your opinion, then the sod, which is the mystical. Yahweh clothed Adam and Eve, Adam and Hava, with what? Animal skins. Well, we know that everything had been created up to that point. Everything was there. And they disobeyed Yah. They didn't heed his word, so they now became separated from him. Spiritually, they became separated. And many of the rabbis and sages say that we were spiritual beings at that time. We were just like, in a sense, the way Yeshua was on the road to Damascus, where the Talmudim, the disciples, didn't even recognize him, didn't know who he was. But they felt something perplexed them about who this man was that they were walking with. Okay, that's how we were. But when sin entered we resonate at a higher frequency. And that frequency, when sin entered, is what slowed everything down and clothed us then with flesh and that which is the natural realm. Everything changed. The earth was very different. And it makes sense that Yahweh says that He's going to make a new heaven and a new earth for a reason. Some things to think about there. So, if Yah provided the first sacrifice, if, as we read, Yah says that He is, He's everywhere. He's a spirit, right? He's not a physical being, right? He's spirit, and those who worship Him in spirit and truth. Okay? He's everywhere. He called forth the creation into being in the very beginning, and He said, let there be light. And He spoke everything into being. He spoke the animals into being. But He's a spirit. So I have to ask the question, how was He? Because when we get further into this, there's some very specific processes that Adonai, Yah, once followed in order to present a sacrifice. Now here we're using logic. So if Moshe saw the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in heaven, and Yah said to him, this is what is in the heavenlies, the spiritual realm, this is how I want it built. You're going to build in the physical realm what exists in the spiritual realm. So, somebody had to physically be there in order to go through. I can't picture the entrails and everything else, just some mystical, invisible thing manipulating these animals. There had to be someone there. And why do I say that? Because Adam had to teach Cain and Abel how to offer up a sacrifice. Okay? So, my question to Jews and Gentiles is, who had to prepare the first sacrifice and clean the entrails and the lower part of the legs? And then, as the Kohen were instructed to do, place it on the altar in a certain way. Because remember, the Mishkan, according to Moshe, is in the heavenlies. It's in the spiritual realm. So who provided the physical carrying out of the sacrifice so that Hava and Adam would be forgiven? That's something to think about. Now, I have my thoughts, but you think about it as we go along. And I think we'll discover it as we look further into the scriptures. Leviticus, or Vayikra, is the core book of the Torah, or the Christian Pentateuch. It is the first book a young Hebrew child learns, studies, and memorizes. It teaches the difference between the things that are holy and unholy, clean and unclean. The original name of the book is not Leviticus or Vayikra. It's called Torah Kohanim, which means the law of the priests. And it's interesting because before Mount Sinai and the giving of the law, in Exodus 19:6, Yah refers to His people as priests. Okay, and I think we read it in the Gospels and Epistles where Rabbi Shaul points out that you are kings and priests after the order of Melchizedek. Something to think about. So if believers in Yah and Yahshua are kings and priests, do you think it's important that they read and understand the Torah Kohanim? I don't know. But in our day, it's really hard to digest. It's all this cutting animals and putting them on an altar and fire, and what's that all about? Well, actually, if you do your research, you'll see that that was very common amongst all the cultures at that time. And I'll bring that up in future parsha studies because I was amazed of what kind of sacrifices were being offered up at that time in ancient times in all the different cultures in the nations in the earth. Israel wasn't very different at all. But what set them apart is all the other cultures offered up human beings as a sacrifice to appease their gods. And what is really perplexing, and what really left Yitzhak perplexed for a moment, and is when he was placed on the altar during the Akedah to be offered up. Now he couldn't understand, why is my father Abraham doing what the pagans do, what the other nations do? That's not the Yahweh we understand, that we know. But it was a shadow. It was a shadow of a sacrifice of a human that was going to come, but that Yahweh was going to provide. Because he intervened at the last minute and stopped it. And what did he do? He inserted another shadow of what was to come that had been in place, but would come in a more broader way, and that is sacrificing of lambs. So the shadow's there. It says, you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me, a nation set apart. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. As we have seen in previous parshas and in how we interpret Scripture, the natural realm shadows what is to come in the spiritual realm, that then it's almost like a circle of revelation. The spiritual realm brings the sacrifice. It accomplishes what it did. It restores you spiritually. Okay? And we see that shadow system and what Yahweh is trying to teach us constantly taking place. The Moshiach is revealed in what manner as we go through Vayikra? Something to think about. As we enter into the book of Vayikra, it will be evident what Yah is pointing us towards. So, I want to begin actually going through this. So if you turn to Vayikra, starting with verse 1, I'm just going to go through this quickly. We're going to look at burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, inadvertent sin offerings, guilt offerings. And this really lays the groundwork, believe it or not, some very specific commands here by Yah about keeping his mitzvot. So, Adonai called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He's no longer speaking to him from up on the mountain, is he? He's speaking to him in the tent of meeting, the holy place. So Yah has come and made himself present amongst his people. He resided in the center of his people. And he said, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any of you brings an offering to Adonai, you may bring your animal offering either from the herd or from the flock." I find that very interesting. What was the dynamics of the people that were considered part of those that were delivered out of Egypt? It was a mixed multitude, right? So common sense logic goes to reason that he says here, when any of you brings an offering. Well, that means any. Any means any. Any one of you that are there as my people, Jew, Gentile, foreigner, they were all included in that Exodus. They were all delivered out. They all crossed over. And again, as I said many times before, to be a Hebrew means really one who has crossed over. So the question is, have you crossed over? And if you've crossed over, from what to what? When any of you brings an offering to Adonai, you may bring your animal offering either from the herd or from the flock. So a burnt offering, okay, is to be a male without defect. Interesting. If we run parallel comparisons of this system and the shadow of the system that Yahweh is pointing to, we have to know that this sacrifice has to be without defect. And that lamb or goat or bull is to be brought to the tent of meeting. So they had to come in and they had to go to the entrance to the tent of meeting and present it to who? Moshe? They had to present it to Adonai, to Yahweh, so that he can accept it or reject it. So what does that tell us? Again, if we look at the parallels, then and now, okay, we are a living sacrifice, according to Rabbi Shaul, right? So when we come before the Father in Yeshua, we need to be accepted. We need to know that we're accepted. And he decides, because he sees the motive and intents of our heart, the genuineness of and our sincerity of coming to offer ourselves up as a sacrifice and to forgive us of whatever it is, the offering that we're bringing. It's interesting, okay? There's a lot here. He's to lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering. Do we all know why? Carl, you're familiar with that? You lay your hands on the head of that animal, and what happens? You transfer by confessing and articulating your sin, what you did wrong before Yahweh, what you did in violating his ways. Okay? Now, understand, this was done in a very intimate area. Nobody else could see. They just knew you went in there with an animal. But there was intimacy there. There was singularity. There wasn't only the priests and the Levites that were on that block of time to be serving in the Mishkan knew that you were there to offer up a sacrifice for sin that you had committed, or a peace offering. So they would lay their hands on that animal's head and transfer their sin, their rebellion and disobedience onto that animal. Words mean things. Those words created, okay, and produced a transfer. Our words operate at frequencies. So that frequency of us, very unique, is transferred to that animal. That animal takes on our sin. And that was Yahweh's method at that time in order to appease our wrongdoing. Life for life. Once that is done, it says, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. Then they're to slaughter the young bull before Adonai. Okay? The sons of Aharon the Kohanim are to present the blood. They are to splash the blood against all sides of the altar, which is by the entrance to the tent of meeting. There it is. There's the entrance to the tent of meeting. Now, can anyone tell me where you may have heard that term sprinkled before?
Sprinkle on your doorposts.
It's in.
Well, you tell them.
Well, Moses sprinkled the people.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Do you think that was a precursor for them to be considered in Yah's eyes as what Gentiles, the Christian church calls today, saved? That was the act initially. A whole nation before Yahweh was sprinkled with blood before him and saved. Preparing them for living a life of offering up sacrifices when they did wrong, when they disobeyed, when they rebelled against HaShem. That was the system then. Because again, if we look back at Bereshit, Genesis, Adam and Hava, and they were clothed with animal skin. Someone had to go through. Yahweh would not change his order when he's initiating the first sacrifice. So someone had to be there to offer up and to prepare those animal skins to clothe them with. You'll have to answer who you think that was. He's then to slaughter the young bull before Adonai, and the sons of Aharon the Kohanim are to present the blood. They are to splash the blood against all sides of the altar, which is by the entrance to the tent of meeting. Very interesting. He is to skin the burnt offering and cut it in pieces. This is the order. The descendants of Aharon the Kohen are to put fire on the altar, arrange the wood in the fire, and then they're to arrange the pieces, the head and the fat on the wood, which is on the fire on the altar. They're then to wash the entrails and lower parts of the legs with water. Why would you want to wash the entrails? Do you know what the entrails are? You know what the entrails are, Michael?
Yeah.
All the inners. They're to be washed. Parts of the legs are to be washed with water. Why would that be? The key organs that have very, very significant functions in that animal's body was washed. What does the liver do? What do the kidneys do?
It cleanses you. It cleanses. You're washing the filthiest parts.
Right.
Yeah.
And now I want you to think about the statements made, you are a living sacrifice. As human beings, we're called to be kings and priests before Yahweh. He's ordained that. It's what He created us for. And the Kohen is to cause it all to go up in smoke on the altar as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, and this, to me, is something to ponder. It is a fragrant aroma for Adonai. We'll look into that more. How is it a fragrant aroma to Adonai? We need to know why this sacrifice is a fragrant aroma to Adonai. And that applies to whether it's a burnt offering, whether there's a bird, a dove, a young pigeon. What's interesting is Yahweh outlines specific instructions on how to prepare the sacrifice. It's another question I'm going to pose. Why is specific instructions? What are they a shadow of? What is it about Yahweh that He's saying that is intrinsic about the animal, and that it being sacrificed becomes an aroma? Then we look at the grain offerings. It says, anyone who brings a grain offering to Adonai is to make his offering of fine flour. He is to pour olive oil on it and put frankincense on it. Okay? The first word there, again, I got to ask the question. It says anyone. Anyone. At that time, at that place, the anyone was Hebrews and Gentiles, other nations, Goyim, who said, we're going with the God of the Hebrews because He is the most high God above all other gods. We saw what He did in Egypt, and we're going with Him. We're going to follow Him. Now that was, of course, then came the test. You know, were you just hightailing out with the Hebrews because you knew you weren't going to experience the decline and destruction that was coming upon Egypt? Do some people follow Yahweh just so that they get a free ticket and get out of all the calamity and troubles? You know, what's your motive? What's your intent? I say it can be perhaps mixed, and then a loving Father draws you in and reveals Himself to you, and you come to know Him, and actually you fall in love with Him because of His goodness and His kindness. So the offering was for anyone to bring. That was a part of the Israelites, the mixed multitude. The Kohen is to take a handful of fine flour from it, together with its olive oil and all its frankincense, and make this reminder portion go up in smoke. So I have another question. And again, throwing these out, because we're going to be going through this whole book, and there's a lot here. What's a reminder portion? An offering made by fire. Again, Yahweh is always putting this in each of the sections as we read. A fragrant aroma for Adonai. This is really important. Okay? Something about a sacrifice, and even us sacrificing and surrendering our lives to Him, and really laying ourselves on the altar and saying, whatever you want me to do, yeah, I'll do it. It doesn't matter. I lay down my life and honor you because I love you, and I'll do whatever you ask me to do. The rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is an especially interesting again. It's an especially holy part of the offerings for Adonai. So we have in the grain offering, we have a reminder portion, and then we have an especially holy part of the offerings. We have to know what that is. When you bring the grain offering, which has been baked in the oven, it can be baked in the oven, it is to consist of either unleavened cakes made of fine flour mixed with olive oil, or matzah spread with olive oil. Interesting that one of the requirements is unleavened cakes. As we know for Pesach, and as Pesach is coming upon us very soon, we have to clean out the leaven from our homes. That is an outward physical thing we do in order to show that we're eliminating the pride and the sin and the puffed upness, because when something's leavened, it puffs up, it expands, it rises. Pride is something that puffs up, that rises. And in coming to Yahweh for the forgiveness of sins, we have to come humble, not proud, and that's exemplified in the unleavened cakes. Okay? And in verse 5 it says unleavened fine flour. You are, in verse 8, you are to bring the grain offering prepared in any of these ways to Adonai. Again, we read earlier where we're bringing them to Adonai, and He wants to approve them. You know? Brings to my mind a scripture. Study the Torah. Study the writings. Okay? A workman that needeth not to be ashamed says, study to show yourself approved. Not to the pastor, not to the rabbi. Study to show yourself approved unto Yahweh. A workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Something to think about. So the grain offering is to be presented to the Cohen, and he's to bring it to the altar. And again, the Cohen is to remove the reminder portion of the grain offering. Make it go up in smoke on the altar and as a fragrant aroma to Adonai. The rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It's an especially holy part of the offerings. Again. Now, here's an interesting point. In verse 11 says, no grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven or honey. No offering, no grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven or honey. Would that be a mitzvah? Is that a command? No grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven or honey. As an offering of first fruits, you may bring these to Adonai, but they are not to be brought up onto the altar to make a fragrant aroma. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff here that's really interesting. And I believe here is another mitzvah. You are to season every grain offering of yours with salt. Do not omit from your grain offering the salt of the covenant with your God, but offer salt with all your offerings. Some synagogues, when they, bless, do the hamotzi blessing, and people partake of it, they have salt there too, to dip, the challah bread into the salt. It's an offering. So, again, things we're going to get into. What is the salt of the covenant? Something I think we need to know. For me, it reminds me of, in that culture, in that time, in the Middle East, it was very common. Covenants and agreements were made with salt. They take each other's salt, put some in his hand, he takes some in his hand, and they'd rub it together. And it sealed their covenant, their commitment to one another, to not break their word. Something, again, to look into in more detail. Because, again, it's not necessarily the act, it's the principle, as I said earlier. What is the principle that Yahweh wants us to actually be ingrained in us? That it's second nature to us, it's our lifestyle. And then we cover the peace offering. Again, a lot of this, there's a lot of repetitive procedures in order that things are done, but that's because Yahweh wants it done a certain way, because it means something. He wouldn't do this if he didn't have a purpose. Our responsibility is to understand the purpose and the meaning and the application and the principles. Yes, Carl?
You think back then they knew what it meant? Or they were just obedient?
I think that back then they were obedient. I think that there were those that were perceptive and seeking more, and they may have begun to connect the dots, if I can put it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not necessarily in the spiritual sense, but in the culture. Did any of those have any of what they did make sense in like the physical sense?
Well, I would, let's look at this. We are set apart. So, in the sense, if we're set apart, the way Yahweh has ordered things to be done is very different than all the other ways. So if in that time, in the ancient times, they were offering up sacrifices in every culture, but not the way the Hebrews were, because it was Yahweh's order. And it was clean. It was holy. They were Molech. They were just putting children and burning them on the altar. There's Baal as well. So, what Yahweh had put in order was very, very set apart, unlike any of the others. Does that kind of give you a direction, or Or is there something more you're trying to...
No, I was just wondering if they were in the same position that we are, trying to understand the meaning, or if they had a better understanding of the meaning of all this
Well,
than
I-
we do.
Yeah, I would say that there's probably things in the Talmud, in the oral Torah, that expound on it. That there's many things that the sages and the rabbis have given their drash on that God's revealed to them. Okay, and I would really point to like the 70 elders. You know, there's a lot of things that were passed down by word of mouth. And I'm sure, you know, I haven't gone that far into seeking those things out, but I will, because I am so excited about studying this book. There's so much there.
The other thing that pops out at me is, back then there was sin in the world. There was no perfect sacrifice. But, saying that, the Lord required our best, their best,
Right.
unblemished. You don't give the Lord your second best. He requires the best.
And wasn't that the sin of Abel or Cain?
Yeah.
Cain gave God the leftovers. He didn't give him the first fruits.
And when I think of even in the epistles, Ananias and Sapphira, they sold the land and only brought part of it.
That's right.
They didn't give the whole thing.
Yeah.
So he wants our best. That's the best we can do. It's not good enough for him, but he recognizes that it's our best, that we're not holding anything back. We're totally
He's looking at
dedicated.
the attitude of our hearts.
Yeah.
Are we giving him what he asks for? And if he asks for our best, we know what's our best.
Yeah.
And if we're not giving it, it's on us. It's on us. He's made it clear. He's made it clear. And that's why I said, as I said in the last parsha, you know, in Psalm 139, he's written every day of our lives in his book. He knows why he created us and what he created us for and what the purposes are that we're to fulfill. And it behooves us to find out and do it. That's giving him his best. That's giving him our best. And in our culture and in this time, it's like as in the days of Noah. Everybody's going around doing their own thing, satisfying themselves. They don't even understand the Torah. The Torah is the foundation, it's the core. And as we go along here, you're going to see some other interesting things about the mitzvot. I'm sorry, but, you know, yes, Gentiles, Goyim, that came in and accepted Yeshua as their Savior and as their atonement, that's good. But Yahweh has shown us in here that for them, it's a process. For them, it's a process of coming into the fullness and the knowledge of Torah. For us, what did we say? We said, Moshe, you go, we'll do whatever he says. So when we, as Jews, said, we'll do whatever you say, we committed ourselves to obeying and doing it without an explanation. We didn't need an explanation. We just had gone through so much, and Yahweh revealed himself so profoundly with the plagues and the crossing of the sea and the water and the provisions. I think with the shaking of the mountain and the darkness and the cloud, I think everything hit home all at once, and we said, oh, you go. Whatever he wants us to do, we'll do it. You know? But Rabbi Shaul shows a gentleness and not putting a weight around their necks, the Gentiles, the Goyim, to suddenly have to do all these things. And actually, when you think about it, even in the Torah as Jews, Yahweh's looking for one thing: the willingness of our hearts. We just went over that in one of the other parshas. So he really wants the willingness of our hearts. He knows it's a process. That's why he provided the sacrifices, so that when we didn't meet up to even maybe where our hearts are in varying stages, he provided a way to reconcile us, clean us off, and to keep going. Because this is all just temporary. Right now, this world and where we're at, it's all temporary. The real thing is ahead of us. But we're being proven and tested now, just like the Israelites were then, just like Yahweh said, I brought you out here to prove you and test you to see where your heart was. It hasn't changed. The Exodus is ongoing until Yeshua returns, till the Moshiach comes. So it's up to you. You know? We choose, we decide how we're going to live our lives. We're going to live it our way or Yahweh's way. Are we going to immerse ourselves in the scriptures, in the Torah, and understand what he wants from us and how we're to be, or are we just going to do our own thing? And then we get what we get. It's that simple. So, but it's interesting, the sprinkling, you know, that was done. So that now, what's being done? They're not sprinkling the person bringing the sacrifice, but he's sprinkling the altar. I wonder why. Did you think that maybe reminded Yahweh when he looked at the person and he saw that sprinkling? He said, I already sprinkled them. I already forgave them. And I'm going to keep forgiving them. Life for life. The animal's life to pay the price, the blood, for your breaking covenant with me, for disobeying me. Because we're broken. We're broken. And Yahweh knows we're in that state of being through this time. He's going to fully and completely restore us. But this journey in this world is to, it's almost like lifting weights or training. He's conditioning us so that our hearts get to the right place, so that we're humbled and we rely on him, we trust in him and not in ourselves. That we recognize everything we have because he gave it to us. It's really, I mean, we are being prepared for eternity. We're being prepared to enter into the Lamb's Supper for his bride. Do you want to be part of the bride of the Messiah, the Moshiach? Well, that's the sod. You know? So, the peace offering was of an animal from the herd, no matter whether it was male or female, but it had to be without defect. Same thing, lay his hands on the head, then they slaughtered it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The sons of Aaron splashed the blood against the sides of the altar and presented the sacrifice of peace offering as made by fire to Adonai. And it consisted of the fat covering. This is interesting. This is a little different because it consists of the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs. The two kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which we will remove with the kidneys. Aharon's sons will make it go up in smoke on the altar, but it's going to go on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood, on the fire. It is an offering made, again, a fragrant aroma. if his offering for a sacrifice of peace, offering to Adonai, is from the flock, then when he offers it, no matter whether it is a male or a female, it must be without defect. He brings the lamb for his offering, then he is to present it before Adonai. He is to lay his hands again, slaughter, splash the blood, okay, and present the offering made by fire of the fat, covering the inner organs, the fat above the inner organs, the kidneys, near the flanks, the covering the liver, which we will remove, the kidneys, and the Cohen again. Make it go up in smoke in the oil. It is food. Wow. Wow. It is food. There's another thing we have to search out. An offering made by fire to be a fragrant aroma. All the fat belongs to Adonai. Isn't that interesting? All the fat belongs to Adonai. And in verse 17, it really makes a statement. We said, you know, there's many places in the Torah where it says, this shall be for all your generations, from generation to generation. The Lord has ordered this, a permanent order. In verse 17 here, it says, in chapter 4, it says, it is to be a permanent regulation through all your generations, wherever you live, that you will eat neither fat nor blood. You know the gristle on your steak? Don't eat it. Not good for you. It's not good for you. Nor is a rare steak good for you either. Because you're literally consuming the essence of that animal, because the life is in the blood. Even though the animal's dead, the essence of that animal resides in that blood, believe it or not. The genetics of that animal are there. Then we have an interesting offering, is the inadvertent sin, or sins of omission. Okay? If anyone sins inadvertently against any of the listen to this. This is where things change. If anyone sins inadvertently against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, if he does any one of them, then if it is the anointed Cohen who sinned and thus brought guilt on the people. But I want to back up there, because this all applies as we go through this. If anyone sins, that word anyone again. Anyone is anyone. Mixed multitude, anyone. So the shadow here is that Yahweh is saying that my intimacy, my relationship, my forgiveness, my reconciliation is for all peoples. But the predominant people were the Hebrews here, and those mixed multitude were welcome to come along, the mixed ones. Okay? Because, why? They are now experiencing salvation, redemption, by the forgiveness of their sins, by offering up sacrifice. Salvation comes through the Jews. Whether it was this form of salvation or what we experience today. But what's interesting here, I say this because there's a connection. If anyone sins inadvertently against any of my mitzvot. Well, wait a minute. I thought we don't need to know the mitzvot. So, it says if he inadvertently sins, okay, concerning things which should not be done, if he does any one of them, then if it is the anointing, now we refer to the anointing Cohen, but it goes into the community and the individual in other places here. My point is that eventually you'll understand what mitzvot you violated. Now, everybody says, oh, we can't keep the mitzvot. We don't have to keep them. Well, do you think the Jews in the wilderness kept all the mitzvot? Well, if they were keeping them, they didn't need the Mishkan. They didn't need to do the sacrifices. But they had to know them. They were saved from the sprinkling of the blood at Mount Sinai. Okay? But they needed to know the mitzvot, and that was the process of being sanctified, learning and seeking, and Moshe teaching them what the mitzvot were. We're responsible to do the same. If we are in a ongoing exodus, and we are, as in our lives, in a wilderness, in a system that we really, it's not where we belong, but this is where we're being proven and tested and prepared for something in eternity, then it behooves us to know the mitzvot, to understand how to apply them at this time and at this place where we're at. So, if the entire community of Israel inadvertently makes a mistake, with the assembly being unaware of the matter, and they do something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, they're guilty. So my question is, can a community of believers as a group break the mitzvot? Can a synagogue or a church or a group of people that call themselves believers or following HaShem, can a community break the mitzvot? Sure they can. Inadvertently. It's worse if it's knowingly. Okay?
Well, if they don't know the mitzvot, it's inadvertent.
That's right. So, you think Yahweh lets us kind of be ignorant forever? I don't think so. I don't think so, because Yeshua even said, if you love me, you'll keep my mitzvot. And that word keep, I believe, was intentionally used rather than commanding us to say, you're to know all my mitzvot. Because when you're commanded, you know, people don't, but it was an expression of love. If you love me, you'll honor my mitzvot. Show me you love me. Learn of my ways. You know? So, here's another interesting thing about this, and I believe this mirrors and shadows what has occurred 2,000 years ago. The bull's hide and all its flesh, this is making the sacrifice, the burnt offering to, you know, atonement for the sin. The bull's hide and all its flesh with its head, the lower parts of its legs, its inner organs and dung. In other words, the entire bull he is to bring outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are emptied out. There he is to burn it on wood with fire. There where the ashes are emptied out, it is to be burned up. Anybody know someone that was basically consumed outside the camp or outside the city? "2,000 years ago, there was a man that was hung on a torture stake outside the city. It's a shadow. And what's really interesting is that if you read Yeshayahu, up until a certain time in history, crucifixion was not a form of punishment in the Roman Empire. It just came into play and implemented when Yeshua came onto the scene. Isn't that interesting? Is that a coincidence? Or is it part of the plan. He must do the same with this bull as he does with the one for the sin offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for them, and they will be forgiven. When a leader sins, so now we have the Kohen, the spiritual leader, can sin and he's got more to do to reconcile that and be forgiven. There's more things, don't want to get into all that detail, but then there's the inadvertent sin of the Kohen. Okay, there's the inadvertent sin of the community. And then there's the inadvertent sin of the leaders within the community. When a leader sins and inadvertently does something wrong, something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai, concerning things which should not be done, he's guilty. So it needs to be a guilt offering. If an individual among the people commits a sin inadvertently, doing something against any of the mitzvot, all 613, applicable to be applied in our generation, to be understood in our generation, against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he's guilty. Very interesting. So I think we need to know the 613 mitzvot. We need to understand them. Our lives should be an experience and a walk of learning them, understanding them, and applying them. Hey, I'll be the first to admit, I'm sure, I know I have things that I don't meet up to. Many, you know. I don't know them all. They're inadvertent right now, but as I seek Yahweh and I understand more and more in the Torah, those things will be shown to me. And then it's up to me to honor Yahweh and to walk out according to what pleases Him. And if I fail, I fail, but I know where to go. I have an advocate with Yah in His Son. So it's incredible. This is just full of unbelievable things. So if the sin he committed becomes known to him, he is to bring as his offering. This is really interesting. Here's the place where the offering is to be a female goat, not a male. A female goat without defect for the sin he committed. That causes me to think, what is it about God ordering a female goat versus giving us a choice to use a male or a female? I want to understand that. There's more to it. Again, lay his hand on the head of the sin offering. Slaughter the sin offering in the place of the burnt offerings. Take the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar. Now we're not sprinkling it on all the sides of the altar. We're putting it on the horns. I want to understand that. Why on the horns now? Okay. All its fat he is to remove. As the fat is removed from the sacrifice for peace offerings, and the Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar. Again, it's a fragrant sacrifice. It's a fragrant aroma for Adonai. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. And lastly, chapter 5, we look at the guilt offering. And these are mitzvot here. This gets interesting. Okay? And again, I say, as Jews and Gentiles, there is a very important, there's a real importance to knowing the mitzvot. If a person who is a witness sworn to testify sins by refusing to tell what he has seen or heard about the matter, he must bear the consequences. If a person touches something unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animal, a domestic animal, or a reptile, he is guilty, even though he may not be aware that he is unclean. If he touches some human uncleanness, no matter what the source of his uncleanness is, and is unaware of it, then when he learns of it, he's guilty. If someone allows to slip from his mouth an oath to do evil or do good, and he doesn't remember that he clearly spoke this oath, then, no matter what it was about, when he learns of it, he is guilty. A person guilty of any of these things is to confess in what manner he sinned and bring his guilt offering to Adonai for the sin he committed. Now, we're all familiar with in the epistles, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Doesn't it kind of sound like that? What's Paul? You got to understand, Paul, Rabbi Shaul connected with the sacrifices. They were still going on while he was alive. So, at some point, I'm going to look at the Gospels and the Epistles, because I believe that what is taking place at the time of the temple being destroyed and the proliferation of the Messianic community, Rabbi Shaul is taking these things that he understood concerning the Mishkan and the sacrifices, and he's putting them into common, understandable terms that then we are able to do the same thing, but with Yeshua as our high priest, as the one we can come to, him standing instead to be our advocate before the Father. The process is still there. It's just that a once and final sacrifice was made. And we can go into all of that where Yahweh says, I'm tired of all your bulls and goats and your sacrifices and all that stuff. I want your heart. And what the relationship with Yeshua does, it's personal. Remember I said last week, this is like a mirror image, a shadow of our own temples. We can go inside of the quietness of our own hearts and talk to Yahweh. We can confess before Him. We can cry. We can be distressed. We can be discouraged, and we can go to Him, and if He resides, if the Spirit of Yahweh lives within you, if you're filled with the Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh is there to comfort and to help you walk through the process of confessing and being honest in your heart with Yahweh and be restored. See, that was the whole intent from the very beginning. If someone allows to slip from his mouth an oath to do evil or to do good, I just read that. A person guilty of these things is to confess in what manner he sinned and to bring his guilt offering. It is to be a female from the flock. Again, Yahweh designates it's to be a female. I want to understand why. There's something, you can't bring a male, it's got to be the female. There's a reason for that. I don't know what it is right now, but we're going to find out. Okay, and the Cohen will make atonement for him in regard to his sin. But if the means of the person bringing this are insufficient, they can bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. And he needs to bring as his offering for the sin he committed 2 quarts of fine flour for sin. Now, isn't that interesting that the atonement and forgiveness through Yeshua doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, what you have, what your talents are, what your abilities are, you know. He receives everyone. If anyone acts improperly or inadvertently sins in regard to the holy things of Adonai, he is to bring as his guilt offering for Adonai a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent in silver shekels, sanctuary shekel, according to your appraisal of its value, its guilt offering. And in 17 it says, if someone sins by doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty. So, once again, I got to go back to the mixed multitude in the shadow of those who have decided. They decided that they were following God's people. The mixed multitude decided they're going with God's people because they recognize He is the God above all of the gods. But as they are there, walking through the wilderness and experiencing Yah, it says if someone sins, that someone can be anyone, by doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he's guilty. Even if he is unaware of it, and he bears the consequences of his wrongdoing. Again, I have to say, Yeshua said, I did not come to get rid of the Torah. Contained in the Torah is all the mitzvot. I didn't come to abolish it. I came to fulfill it. He has brought forth a better sacrifice, a better system of redeeming us, of bringing forth the atonement of our sins for this time, while we are still on this earth, and before he reconciles the whole world to himself, Tikkun Olam. I think Jew or Gentile, and I'll say Jews, we got to know it. Gentiles, you got to come at your own free will. You choose. So, I guess you can partake of what we'll get to in Devarim, where it says, if you keep my commandments, here's the blessings, and here's the cursings. So to not learn them, know them, understand them, you bear the consequences. It's that simple. So if you want to be blessed and free and full of the Shalom of Yah, it would behoove you to seek them out and learn them and apply them and understand them. It's not what saves you. It's not what brings you salvation. It's what brings you perspective and wholeness, and it brings you shalom. And you realize that it's a work, it's a process. It's almost like Yahweh as Father is training us up. He's teaching us His ways and preparing us so we can enter His kingdom for eternity. We're not going to get it all right, all 613 perfectly, and that's not the point. This is the point. The heart's desire to want to walk in His ways and know His ways. So, I'm going to just end with that. And just say, as it's written, without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. There's no forgiveness. Because the life is in the blood. Life for life. That's Yahweh's order. And if there's no sacrifices going on, or if you don't embrace the sacrifice that Yeshua had laid down his life and shed his blood for us and brought a better way, well, you can keep doing all your donations and, your trust funds or your, whatever they call them, endowments and all the wonderful good things. Human beings are capable of doing very good, kind, wonderful things. But Yahweh said, all have broken my mitzvah. All have disobeyed me and rebelled against me and fallen short of the wholeness, of the completeness that exists when you're holy and my glory fills your temple. Yahweh wants to fill our temples. We as human beings, this is our temple. We're just clothed with flesh right now. It's what's inside that matters. And that's where everything converges, your heart, your mind, your emotions, your spirit. That becomes the heart of who you are. So, all right. Any questions? Baruch HaShem. This is just a start. It's going to be really good. I'm
Hear now, Jacob my servant. Hear now, O Israel. It was I who